Good crowd this morning. When Yana was talking about Scrubs, I saw a lot of you have seen the show. That was the realistic show. Years ago, as you heard, I worked for the AMA. When that show was actually still on the air and being produced, the AMA had a meeting in Los Angeles, and in a breakout session that was just for medical students and residents, the cast, the writers, the production crew of Scrubs came to meet with the group. And students and residents just, wow, these are the real people, the real actors. The people from Scrubs were going, wow, these are real residents, real students. One of the reasons why that show became so realistic was they took that session that was supposed to be kind of downloading information for people like you and used that to inform actual scripts, even the Scrubs. One of the residents said, why do you have everything tucked in? Well, isn't that how you, no, this is how we really wear them. It was realistic down to the smallest detail because they actually took the time to meet with real people. So it is a realistic show, and they were wonderful to meet and work with. As you heard, I do a lot of speaker training. A lot of the work that I do is training physicians to speak like this in public, to do interviews with news media, and it turns out that many of the skills are absolutely the same, or at least so similar, between speaking in those settings and speaking in interviews. I've ended up helping people with job interviews. I mean, who hasn't been interviewed? Raise your hand if you've been interviewed for college, undergrad, medical school, jobs and interns. Everybody's hand goes up for this. Who enjoys it? One hand goes up. Two, okay. Three, most people really don't like being interviewed. It's not comfortable. It's not really a lot of fun. So let's dig into this a little bit. Preparing for your interview, or is it an inquisition? For some of us, it may feel that way. We don't like speaking. But think of every answer you give as a short speech. Every answer. That's why the disciplines of speaking in public and being interviewed really have so many of the same basic fundamentals. Everyone has a short speech. We don't like speaking in public in general. If you survey people, and this number remains pretty consistent over time, number one fear is speaking in public. Look what it's relative to. More afraid of speaking in public than dying. So it's okay to be nervous. It's okay to know that maybe one of the biggest challenges you have is yourself. You know, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. We really have to figure out how to overcome that. I'll come back to this, but a lot of it is going to be actually turning that nervous energy into helping you get through the interview. Now, we think of our answer as critical, and the words that we're saying. Words are very powerful. What you say is very important. But when it comes to verbal, meaning words, and what gets through to the audience in an interview situation or in a public speaking situation, the words themselves only account for 7% of what gets through and convinces your audience, compared to vocal, the way it sounds, the way you deliver the words, and then look what happens to the overall visual impact. So it's often the unspoken message that's really important, which is why your questions about energy, your questions about nervousness, those actually come into play. People are observing you, and again, you may hear this from other panelists, but they're trying to decide, do we want to live with you? Do we want to be married to you? We're living together for the next few years. This interview is not, are you qualified? You wouldn't be in the room if you weren't qualified. The whole thing comes down to, will you fit in here? Are you a good match for us? When push comes to shove, do we want to be stuck with you in a dire situation? And in one of those situations, can we count on you? This is at the very root of what they're trying to get through and get from you during these interviews. So how you project yourself really will make a difference. Now, when I came in, I looked around, I came in the back, and I could see immediately, this room is 2/3 women. A trend we've seen developing over many years, which is great. But now the roles have changed. It used to be a lot easier to try to remember the woman because there were so few. Now you're competing with so many other women. So what will make you memorable? What will make you stand out? And that's part of what Jana was getting through in talking about stories. What will make you memorable? Because when they go through and start rating everybody and start comparing, it's a lot of people they're interviewing. How will they keep track of you? Oh, she's the one who, he's the guy that, her story really touched me. Those are the things that you'll want to bring out. So when you think about the interview that Jana did with Aaron a few moments ago, I'm going to come back to this, but think about the first question she asked and the first answer that he gave. You have one opportunity to make a first impression. By definition, it's the first impression. So you've got to get that first one right. I'm going to mention this now and we'll come back to it. I'm going to suggest, after listening to that you begin thinking about what is your message? What makes you unique? What is one thing you want them to remember you for when you leave the room so they never confuse you with someone else, especially if they liked you? And remember, it's a two-way street. You're rating them as well. So an interview, whether it's with the news media, and I do the same thing with physicians, president of the State Medical Society, if he or she is going into a news media, they are not just there to answer questions. They're there because they represent all the physicians of Illinois. Their job is to get the message of ISMS out to the public through the media. So I'm not just there to answer questions. I have a message. If that doctor has not gotten that message through to the reporter, he hasn't done his job. You have not done your job interviewing for one of these programs if they don't remember that thing that's going to make you stick out from all the rest. Three keys to effective speaking and interviewing, and these are, I consider them universals. But before I go through that, you'll see a lot of threes in my presentation today. One of my biggest secrets that I love sharing, so it's not really a secret anymore, is the rule of threes. Everything in three, people have been writing and speaking in threes for centuries. Things that come in threes are more easily remembered. They're inherently funnier, more satisfying, more comfortable. We remember things in threes. Think of nursery rhymes: Three Blind Mice, Hickory Dickory Dock, The Three Musketeers, The Three Stooges, Latin, I came, I saw, I conquered. Things are in three are more easily remembered. It's not an accident. So if I'm writing to a new client or a pitch that I want to do some work for you as a consultant, I'm going to say my background, skills, and experience make me perfectly suited for this job. If I have two, I'll try to think of what's the third thing I can, even an email, writing email yesterday. I had 4 things on a list. Okay, that's one too many. What can I drop? People will remember threes. So rules of threes will be consistent throughout everything I talk about today. The keys to effective speaking and interviewing are know your audience, know your content, stay structured, and stay short. I'm going to come back to all 3 of these. Know your audience. Jana talked about that. You've done your homework in advance. You've learned about the person that's interviewing you, or the group that's interviewing you, or the institution where you're interviewing them, where you're going in to apply. Know each of those. Do as much as you can. I'm going to say something about nerves because when I speak like this is a performance. I get performance anxiety. I get sweaty. I'm probably going to show that pretty soon. It's okay. I mean, this is a performance, and you'll have to think through how you deal with if you get sweaty during interviews. But today, with the heat and humidity, I'm going to be a little bit wet. But this is okay, and admit it. If this is something, and a lot of you do have cold, clammy hands, think about how you're going to deal with that and acknowledge it. These are reality things because that whole visual part, how you come across, that's part of how you're going to be perceived by people. Institutions, you've done your homework, you know what you can about them. And the person who's interviewing you, as I said, is always wondering, are you a good fit for them? So know the audience, know what you can about them, and tailor your remarks to them. If this is a place you're really interested in, you need to know why. What is it about them that put them high in your priority list? And be able to talk about that, be able to ask about that. And if there are things you really want to know, your good questions, because you've thought about those in advance, will show you've done your homework, but something might not have been clear. And if you can do that honestly and earnestly, they'll say, she's really interested, and she really asked a good question. And maybe our website isn't good enough. We need to be clear about it. Okay, your audience, through your questions and answers, you're going to demonstrate that you're a good fit. You're going to try to appeal to them by showing as much as you can that you've done your homework and what attracted you to that place in the first place. Okay, that's the audience. Your content, your story. What's in your resume or CV? Now, the letter that Jana talked about, and Joe, the skier, who wasn't that memorable or wasn't that good a friend in the first place, the same thing is going to be in your CV or resume. I'll call it a resume. If it's listed there, you should be prepared to address it. Don't put anything in there that you can't speak to, because you never know who has a specific experience, personal connection, background, interest in some aspect of your resume. I mean, you heard in the introduction that I've been the announcer for Northwestern's marching band 37 years. That's a long time. And people are really curious about that, and they'll ask about that. But you know, I've been around a long time. If, let's just say, you were in your marching band, be able to think about that experience. Was there something in there that ended up bringing you to that time and that moment for that interview that actually makes a good story, tells a little bit about who you are, and makes you memorable? But if it's not, I would go into every interview, and before you walk in the room, look through the resume again and think of specific examples. If they see something in there, tell me about this. What was this all about? This really is unusual. And I'll use the marching band again. One of my good friends in college went to law school in Washington, D.C. And somehow while he was in law school, he found time to be in the Washington Redskins marching band. Now, for professional football, for the NFL, they are either the only or one of the only professional teams that still has a marching band. It's just like college. There are a bunch of people from high school through retirement who get on that Redskins uniform with the headdress, so politically incorrect today. They still haven't gotten rid of that, and they actually march on the field, and then they sit behind the goalposts, they sit in the end zone during football games and play the team fight song. Outside of Washington, most people don't know they exist. But in D.C., they're very famous and very popular. So when my friend was interviewing for clerkships and internships, which is the equivalent of your residency interview, people would see that in his resume, and same thing. He wouldn't be there if he weren't qualified. Nobody cared about his legal work and things he had written and who he had worked with. They all wanted to know about the Washington Redskins marching band. That's what made him memorable, and that's what made them think, is this someone I want to work with? And that got him more offers than anything. So you never know what in that resume someone is going to relate to and say, I like her, and she really speaks to me. So be able to address everything in that CV. There is no substitute for anecdotes and personal experience because they're yours. No one can take that away from you. And nothing is more personal than something that is yours. So if it's your story, make sure to bring those out. Make sure you think through every one of those things in the resume that can give some insight into who you are and what it would be like to live and work with you, because that's what you're asking them to do. Specific examples. If you tease with just a general comment, I'm a good multitasker, make sure you're able to explain that you really can't have multitask and give examples. If you did research projects, all of those are fair game, and you'll list those in your CV or resume, but think through in advance what was involved in that. If it's been a long time, it might have been really good work, but you did it a long time ago, and I don't remember you can't do that. You've got to be able to say, yes, this is what we did, this was my role, address everything in that. And these are all fair game. Extracurricular. So marching band, you name it. Whatever you did, those may be just so full of good examples to draw on and give insight into what makes you different and unique. So, and any of these ranges in your life are still valid. So, the most recent stuff, good, but you can go back a little bit further if it actually is valid. I mean, if something happened to you as a kid and it's the reason you want to be a physician, those are all fine. It doesn't matter how long ago it was if it's valid and it gives them that insight that you want them to have. Be selective on the anecdotes. Make sure that they're appropriate. Think through the age, the type of person you'll be speaking to, the language you're using. Is it really good for this audience, or maybe I should come up with something different? Make sure that the anecdotes are appropriate and that you're able to go beyond the specifics of a question if they come up. Being open and receptive increases your credibility, so don't get defensive. If it's in the resume, if it's something that you want to talk about, be able to answer the question even if it's uncomfortable. Being open like that increases your credibility. I'm going to come back to this. The bridging techniques lets you tease one thing and go to a point you want to make, and that was something that came up with Jana and Aaron. Aaron answered questions that Jana didn't ask because he came in advance with some messages he wanted to get across. You're going to bridge to those. Stay short and stay structured. The KISS principle, keep it short and simple. Or when I was in college, we'd say keep it simple, stupid. I mean, same thing. Keep your answers short. I would argue that your first answer should be one of your shortest. Have down in your mind your opening comments, your fallback position to say who you are, why you're there, what you want to do, and do it concisely. This is important when I'm teaching people to give news media interviews, because if the reporter hears the person answering the question go on and drone on and on and on, they're thinking, what quote am I using? Or if it's for broadcast and I have to boil it down to 8 seconds, what's the sound bite? What am I going to use from that? But if you sound like you're able to listen to a question, think about it, process it, and then give a thoughtful answer and do it concisely, they're going to think about your thought process, your ability to articulate who you are and what's important to you. And they'll also know that they'll have time for a good give and take conversation. If you go on and on with every answer, you're not going to be able to answer many questions. But if you can be concise and give them some really good meat on the bone of the answer that you're giving, they're going to say, okay, this is someone I can work with. We're going to have a really good, productive conversation. And stayed structured. Again, think of every answer as a speech. So if they ask a question, be able to respond with the short answer. Yes, no, here's my answer, and then give some reasons. At least one to explain why you answered the way you did, but no more than 3 because of the rule of 3s. And then wrap it up. Summarize, come back and reinforce your opening answer. So you've tied it up like a miniature speech. Every good speech, when I'm training people to give public speeches, this is what I focus on. You have an opening, your introduction, you've got the main part of the speech with up to 3 messages, but people can't remember many more than 3 anyway, and then you wrap it up. If the president of ISMS is going out to speak to physicians and saying, I need you to talk to your state representatives and senators to tell them to vote for this bill, the call to action is in the end, and you've convinced them to do that because of what you did before that. This is just a concise version of the same thing. So think of every answer. There are going to be exceptions. Yes, there will be cases where you can't answer everything that way. But if you go in preparing for the interview thinking every answer is a short speech, that's the structure that you need to try to follow. Anybody heard of the expression elevator speech? I see heads nodding. For those of you for whom this is a new idea, think of getting onto an elevator and meeting someone. You're having one of the receptions before the residency interviews, and someone sees a name tag and says, oh, Pete, tell me about yourself. You get on the elevator on the first floor, and you're going up, let's say, 25, 30 floors, because this is going to take about a minute. You need to be able to give your elevator speech to say who you are and what's memorable about you in the time it takes to get on the first floor and get off on the top floor. To hone that message, try it out on other people. Get feedback from others and find out what they think. Find out what works. Talk to some of your closest friends and ask, is this really me? Does this really reveal who I am? You've got to really work at this. If you want to do this, it's not supposed to be easy. But if you put the effort into it, it will pay off. Hone that down and then practice it. Same way you look at that CV or resume before every interview, do that elevator speech. Be thinking about that whenever you can and come back to it and then learn from each interview and refine it every time you go through it. Same thing in giving a public speech. Your audience is not just a sponge listening to you. They are also a mirror. Every time I do this, I do something a little bit differently because I'm looking at reactions from you. I'm learning what works and what doesn't. The only thing that never quite works is how long that exchange in the elevator speech takes, because everybody starts talking and then you become best friends all of a sudden. And I'm not going to take that out, but I learn from watching you, and I've been doing this a long time. Learn from each of the interviews and use that experience, and you'll get better with each one that you do. Interviewers do want to see that you're confident, but also respectful and honest. And that gets to the confidence versus cockiness part of it. They want to see you be confident in yourself and comfortable in your own skin, but you've got to be respectful because, again, it comes down to, are you someone that they want to work and live with? So be thinking about and tailoring your response to the audience. Look for visual cues. Look for verbal cues. Listen to their questions. Their questions will often be very informative, what they're seeing and hearing from you, and you're triggering questions in their mind. So they may come in with a set of questions, and once they're talking to you, say, let's dig a little bit deeper into this. It's only human nature. And my first job was as a reporter. I've got a naturally inquisitive mind. If you open a door that piques my curiosity, I'm going to walk through there and find out more. And these, what are you but scientists? And you're researchers, and they're going to do the same thing. So if you open that door, make sure it's one that you want to open because they may go through there. But then see where it goes and learn from that each time. How do you do this? Remember, you are your own advocate. Nobody else is in the room with you advocating for you. So you're the only one speaking. You've got to rely on your own preparation to survive that situation. Preparation is knowing everything in the resume, being able to talk about yourself, doing the research in advance. It really comes down to that because what else do you have to prepare for except rehearsing, knowing your answers, knowing everything in the CV, being able to talk about yourself. And then you're going to use some of the techniques I'm going to talk about next to stay in control. So be succinct. Make sure that the first answer is short and to the point. It's okay to pause and stop and think about the question. As soon as the question is answered, you don't have to jump in immediately with your answer. It's okay to stop a moment and think. No matter what the speaking situation is, a pause will feel to you like an eternity. But to the person on the receiving end, it's really never that long. You want to jump in. That's why when people speak, they say, yeah, you know. Those are filling space so there's no silence because we become uncomfortable during silence. But it's actually okay to pause a moment and think. Now, don't look perplexed or scared if you can help that. But think about it because that was a good question. And then come up with a good answer. So pausing is okay. And then think of an answer that will stand out and make you memorable. Things that will always come back that the interviewer will write down or remember when they're talking later and evaluating with each other, you and the people who they interviewed that day. During the interview, expect some questions asked, same questions, but different ways. If they're trying to get something from you, if they're trying to better understand you, and they don't think you answered the question, or maybe you didn't understand the question, or you were evading the question, they may come back again if it's important to them. If you hear the same question, don't let it throw you off. Don't say, well, as I answered before, or I think I answered that. You know, that could be a little off-putting. Just think of it, okay, well, I'm going to learn from this. Maybe I wasn't clear, or maybe they're trying to get at something. What might I have missed? If you hear the same question, it's okay. If you don't know the answer, don't guess. It's okay to say, I don't know. If you try to guess at an answer, you may dig a hole you don't want to step into. Be honest. Honesty is always your best approach. It's okay. Let yourself off the hook. It's okay to say, I don't know. And if there's an important message that's maybe part of your elevator speech or maybe part of who you are, and it's important to you that that's what makes you memorable, find an opportunity to repeat that. Because you've said it once doesn't mean I've covered it. It will reinforce one of your main messages, so it's okay. Okay, this is something I use in interviews with news media, and if you watch an interview today, if you turn on the news, you will see this in some interviews where the reporter asks the question and the answer is somewhere over there. How well they go from here to there is how good they are at bridging. Some people are very good at it, some are not so good. But the idea is you want to get from here to there. The reporter, or in this case your interviewer, is here. You want to end up there. So what is that? It allows you to respond to the question, but steers the question to something you really want to address, not what they're trying to lead you to. But you've got to be responsive. If this is a one-way street, it becomes an interrogation. But as I said at the beginning, you want to get something out of this too. You want to first learn a lot about them and decide whether or not you really want to end up there and how you're going to rate them. But you also want to learn about the environment, any questions that you have. You're selling yourself and you're evaluating them. It's not just you answering their questions. This is where bridging comes in. This is what Aaron did in bridging from the questions that Jana was asking to the points that he wanted to get out. And it's not disrespectful, it's not sneaky, it's just an effective way of communicating and answering questions, and as I said, keeping them from becoming a one-way interrogation. Whoa, what happened? All right, we're back. Helps guide or direct the interviewer, so if you've got points you want to make, that helps them get to that. And then it allows you to transition back to one of your key points. So what's in the elevator speech? It's not that you give the elevator speech again, but if it's another way to phrase something in there and reinforce one of the points, this is all bridging. It's the most common tactic, and that's why I spend the most time on it. But let's get to some examples. They ask you one thing, and maybe your answer is yes. You answer the question, and in addition to that, so you're starting here. Here's the question. They ask this, but in addition to that, you're building that bridge, or you're taking them across the bridge to the point you want to make. Or if they're a little bit off base, they're thinking that this is the truth about you, and no, let me explain. And then you go to the point you want to make and leave them with the impression you want to give them. I don't know the answer to that, but what I can tell you, there are a ton of different ways you can approach it, and it's got to be you. Don't use my words. Use what works for you and sounds like you to start with where they are and get to where you want to be, which is one of your key messages coming into this interview. That's bridging. This next one is very similar. We call it hooking because whether it's vaudeville decades ago, get a hook around someone's neck and pull them off the stage. Or you're fishing, cast out the hook and then reel them in. You're trying to reel them into or take them to where you want to go. So if the interviewer, it's very similar to bridging. If you're trying to hook them to a point that you want to make, if they ask about something in your CV and you say, I'm very proud of that, and there are other research projects in which I played a pivotal role. Now you're teasing them with that, you're dangling them that out there. You may not go into that at the moment. They might respond to that by saying, oh really, tell me about those. Tell me more. You might be interested in, I did this and this and this, and you can let it go at that. Or give a little bit more brief description, but you're hooking them to the points you want to make. I have other experience that might prove to be very useful here. Well, what are those? This is all hooking. These are all ways to be responsive to the questions from the people interviewing you, but still being true to yourself and getting across the message you want to get across about what makes you memorable, who you are. Okay, the third one is flagging. Flagging is saying, okay, here's a key point, important message coming through here, It helps the interviewer remember that this is one of your key points, and you also signal you're about to make a key point. The qualities I bring to the table are very clear. You're about to make a very definitive statement. This is who I am. This is what I want you to remember about me. My 3 strongest attributes are, okay, 3, rule of threes. My 3 strongest attributes are, now you've said 3, they're going to be listening. Okay, that's the first one. Oh, that's the second one. What's the third one? Oh, very interesting. There's the third one. These are ways to reel them into those key points. And you can, these are just examples. Think of what works for you and sounds like you. That's flagging. Okay, when things go bad, let me first, the question about illegal questions or inappropriate questions, I'm going to respond to that one very briefly now and then ask that you make sure the panelists address that, because they're actually in a better position than I to do that. If there are questions they ask about you personally that would not be legal in a job interview, you don't have to answer that. They're going to be curious. And again, if they are trying to decide if they want to be engaged to you for the next few years, they're going to see how you answer. And my knee-jerk reaction, and they may disagree with you, the professionals who will be on the next panels may disagree with me, but I'd say, you know, I'm really uncomfortable addressing that, and maybe there will be a time and place that I can, but let me tell you what my values are. Use that opportunity to bridge. Try to be respectful, don't be evasive, but show that I do want to talk to you. We can work together if you like them, if this is a place you want to be. But I'm not going to go there because that question was out of bounds. You're not going to make me answer that. But in a polite way, you're saying, you're going there, here are my values. This is where I see myself. This is what I want to be. This is the type of physician that I aspire to being. I would defer to the others, but that one to me was important. Things go bad, keep your cool. Don't panic. It's highly likely that something will go wrong at some time. You've got to be able to let yourself off the hook. And if it's because they made a mistake or you made a mistake, it's okay to correct misperceptions. If they don't get you correctly, make sure you set the record straight so when you leave the room, there's nothing left hanging there that was unclear or that was incorrect. But try to relax, keep your cool, and answer things respectfully, and be willing to let yourself off the hook, because occasionally it will happen. If they say something about you that actually shows that they didn't understand something and there's a misperception or an incorrect assumption about you, correct that right away. Never, but don't repeat it. No, I'm not an axe murderer, or you know, I didn't kill my roommate. You don't repeat the negative. I mean, this is important in a news interview because the reporter can take the quote, and we've seen this, and use that. That ends up what's being the soundbite that's on radio or on TV. But in this type of situation, you don't repeat it. You just correct it and move on, so that's not hanging out there. And this is very similar to the answer I gave about the inappropriate question. You address it, but you bridge. You bridge to what you do want to say if something is negative. So aren't you really saying you might be a better fit somewhere else? I mean, if this interview has started to go south and it's felt uncomfortable, maybe this is where, instead of saying, yeah, maybe you're right, maybe this isn't the best place, I believe I can make, what's a positive response? I believe I can make the greatest contributions and benefit the most in a program that does. You try to find the positive spin on it. Even if you're not comfortable, if you've decided during this interview, this is not where I want to be, don't leave it like that. You can rate them low, and that's the way you address that. But end on a positive note. You never know when something may come back. Someone there may end up working with you someday, or they may know someone who knows you that didn't come out until the reception later. You never want to burn bridges. You never want to say anything that might come back to haunt you. So make sure you spin it in a positive way. I mentioned before, look for visual cues. If people aren't buying what you're saying or something isn't working, you'll see that. I mean, we're all human. We've been in social settings where someone, they're bored with what you're saying. Maybe someone who feels a little superior and You kind of, okay, this is someone you're never going to be a friend of. You get visual cues in so many different settings. It's the same thing in an interview. Watch for that and learn from that and use that in the next interview. You may determine that that might not be an example I'll want to use again. If that story turns out to be too long and oh boy, the person listening is looking at their watch, rolling their eyes, whatever it is, look for those visual cues. Listen for the verbal cues. If their questions suggest that your answer wasn't clear, you think you answered it, as I said earlier, well, maybe it wasn't clear. Think about how you answered questions and go to school on that. Learn from that and answer those questions differently the next time. And get a feel for the vibe of the room. If things are fun and relaxed and it's going well, it's okay. If it's a little awkward, what is it telling you? And is there anything you can do and adapt during that interview to put them at ease or to show that you're relaxed? Humor was one of the questions that came up. This is very difficult. It's difficult in an interview. It's difficult in a speech. And I'll give you my basics on this. It's got to be appropriate and it's got to be relevant. And we've all heard people tell inappropriate jokes, make inappropriate references, and this is the last place you want to do that. So be very judicious, be very careful about what you do, and make sure if it's something that is humorous, that it's relevant to where you are and what you're interviewing for and the people that you're with. A great fallback is to talk about yourself. Self-deprecating humor, because it's about you. You're not attacking someone else. No one else is the butt of a joke. You never know what someone's sensitivity is because you don't know these people. You've just met them for the first time. But you can make jokes about yourself. As I said, I've been a marching band announcer for years. My team is now kind of competitive. They're not going to the national championship, but now they're competitive. When I started doing this, we didn't win football games, period. There was a streak where we lost 34 consecutive football games. So when people would introduce me as a guest speaker and they'd say, because it's something interesting about me, a little human interest, I'm here. I used to be a lobbyist. So he's a lobbyist for this group, but he's also the marching band for the the announcer for the Northwestern University Wildcat Marching Band. You've got such a bad football team. They never go anywhere. So I would make some self-deprecating joke. There's an old story about the phone rings at the Ryan Field ticket office, and someone answers the phone. Oh, Ryan Field, what time is the football game this afternoon? Well, what time can you get here? Something that would just suggest, I'm poking fun at me, not at them. If you're going to use any humor, it's okay to do something self-deprecating, but let's look at it this way. Follow the interviewer's lead. If they're not that funny, if they're not cracking jokes, you're not there to one-up them. But if it is relaxed and you can roll with it and you're comfortable with it, okay, follow their lead. If you're not sure, leave it out. And my fallback is, leave it out. If it feels natural, it'll work, it'll happen. I would not plan on humor. Be yourself. Be true to yourself throughout each of these interviews. Make sure your language is simple. You're not there to impress them with fancy words and jargon. They know that you're qualified. You don't have to show it by using big words, and especially taking the risk of saying something that's inappropriate. You're still, when it comes down to it, these are still just people. They're just like everyone else. Speak to them as you would a respected friend or colleague, but don't try to impress them with big words. Use active voice. The difference between active and passive. I was given an award. I earned an award. I was taught years ago, I learned to do this. Something that shows that you were active in something, that you did something, not something was done for you. It was given to you. You earned something. Use passive, use active action words. Be conversational. Have a conversation. This is not a formal speech. You're not giving the Gettysburg Address. You're having a conversation. Speak to them as if you're going to work with them because that's what you want to do, and be yourself. Appearance, be appropriate. I hope I don't have to talk about how to dress for an interview. Maybe the others will later. Appearance should be appropriate. Good eye contact. Some of us have trouble with that. I know that when someone asks me a question, often my first reaction is I look up a moment and think about it. And once during a job interview, someone asked me a question, and I was doing this, and the interviewer said, "You look angry." I never knew that I furrowed my brow when I was thinking, and it made me look angry. And I got home and was having dinner with my wife. I said, "This is what happened." She said, "Yeah, you do that." I had no idea. So eye contact and how you look, facial expressions, demeanor, these are all important. Gestures, be open, be relaxed. If your arms are like this, or you're gripping the edge of a chair, you're going to look a little bit uncomfortable and suspicious and betraying what it is you want to present to them. Use open, relaxed body language. Make sure you speak clearly. Slow down. When we're nervous, we speed up. Slow down. Make sure that you're clear. Make sure they understand what you say. Finish your sentences. I mean, I'm exaggerating now. I'm trying to make sure I articulate that I am articulating every word so you do not misunderstand anything I say. I'm exaggerating. But I've heard so many people speak and they start to throw away words at the end of a sentence. Now, you might know in context what I'm saying, but if I'm throwing them away, then it doesn't make any difference. Be clear. Make sure that they get it and speak all the way through your answer. It's okay to pause and think. Pauses are powerful. If you're giving an answer to something and you get to the punchline, and my friend Joe, after he had that near fatal head injury that I don't remember anything about from Aaron's ski trip, and in the end, Aaron became a brain surgeon. I mean, it's okay to pause a little bit for dramatic effect. Don't overdo it, but build in pauses. Everybody has stage fright. I get it. I've been performing for more than 3 decades. I still get stage fright. I still get nervous. I still sweat. It's okay. How do you deal with it? Prepare. Do that homework. Be prepared in advance. Think positively. Don't go in saying, "Oh, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to bomb. This was bad. The last one was bad. This will be worse." You've got to be positive going into it. Okay, this is now my second one. The first one may bomb. Maybe it could happen. Let yourself off the hook. Second one, I'm ready to go. Think positive. Exercise. That helps burn off nervous energy. It helps give you some energy. Practice, 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 practice. Practice with friends. Practice in front of a mirror. Videotape yourself. I've been announcing for years, I hate listening to my voice. I hate looking at myself. I don't like video of myself. But until I did that, I didn't know all the quirky things I do in delivery. Videotape yourself. It's hard to do, but have someone ask you questions and you answer. Find out, are you furrowing your brow? Are you looking all over? Are you having trouble making eye contact? What is your body language like? If you don't actually see it, you have no idea how you come across and how you look to others. This is how you start working on the question about being genuine, question about enthusiasm at the beginning, question about confidence. I think you will learn more by videotaping yourself and seeing how that comes across. You will learn things about yourself you never knew, no matter how old you are. That is how I would deal with that. What is working and what's not. You will see things you need to correct just from that. I really do believe that that's going to be the answer to that question, or those questions. Practice with someone that you trust, that you're comfortable doing this with. It's still going to be awkward. It's still going to be a little uneasy, but do it. Gather and channel your nervous energy. Direct that into the interview. Use that to give you the energy and the confidence to get through it. And as I said, the person interviewing you is not just a sponge, they're a mirror. See how they're reacting to things. Breathe. Yes, breathe. That'll get you through the interview. Okay. Remember that audiences remember what you say first and what you say last. So conclude with a positive reinforcing message. Maybe you conclude with part of your elevator speech. Maybe it's elevator speech part 2 or take 2. Try to get in the last word. At the end of the interview, if there's something you didn't have a chance to say, or if there's something that was in your elevator speech that you think you didn't get a chance to address enough, save that for the end. And as you're thanking them, as you're getting up to leave, you might say, if there's one thing I hope you'll remember me by, there it is.